At 1:23 in the morning, on April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded with the force of 400 Hiroshimas. In that single moment, more radioactive material was released into the atmosphere than both atomic bombs dropped on Japan combined. The Soviet Union had built the most powerful empire on Earth, but it could not survive what happened in the quiet Ukrainian countryside that night. The Chernobyl plant sat near the city of Pripyat, a model Soviet community of 50,000 people. Engineers, scientists, and their families lived in modern apartments, surrounded by schools, theaters, and parks. It was a showcase of Soviet achievement, proof that communist planning could deliver a prosperous future. The plant itself represented the pinnacle of Soviet nuclear engineering. 4 massive RBMK reactors generating enough electricity to power millions of homes across the Western Soviet republics. But beneath the propaganda, the RBMK design harbored a fatal flaw. Soviet engineers knew about it. Party officials knew about it. Yet acknowledging the problem would mean admitting Soviet technology was imperfect. And in the communist system, such admissions were career-ending, sometimes life-ending. So the flaw remained hidden, classified, buried in technical documents that never reached the men who operated the reactors. That night, a safety test was scheduled for Reactor 4. The goal was simple: determine whether the turbines could generate enough power during a shutdown to keep coolant pumps running until emergency generators kicked in. It was a routine procedure that had been postponed multiple times. When the order finally came to proceed, the night shift was unprepared. Deputy Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov pushed forward anyway. The test required reducing reactor power to dangerously low levels. When operators accidentally dropped power too far, Dyatlov ordered them to raise it again. To do so, they had to withdraw nearly all the control rods, the graphite-tipped mechanisms that regulated the nuclear reaction. The reactor became increasingly unstable, but Dyatlov insisted the test continue. He threatened to fire anyone who refused. At 1:23 a.m., operator Leonid Toptunov pressed the emergency shutdown button known as AZ-5. It was supposed to stop the reaction instantly. Instead, the graphite tips of the control rods caused a massive power surge as they entered the reactor core. In 4 seconds, power output jumped to 100 times the normal operating level. The fuel rods shattered. Steam pressure blew the 1,000-ton reactor lid through the roof. A second explosion followed, scattering burning graphite and radioactive debris across the facility. The men in the control room did not understand what had happened. They could not accept that the reactor had exploded because they had been taught it was impossible. When radiation detectors maxed out at 3.6 Roentgen per hour, plant managers assumed the instruments were faulty. The actual radiation levels were 15,000 times higher. Firefighters arrived within minutes. They were not told they were walking into a radioactive inferno. First responders climbed onto the roof of the turbine hall, where chunks of reactor core glowed in the darkness. They picked up pieces of graphite with their bare hands. Within hours, these men were vomiting, their skin turning red, their bodies breaking down at the cellular level. 28 of them would be dead within weeks. Soviet authorities initially refused to acknowledge the disaster. Local party officials assured Moscow that the situation was under control. Meanwhile, a radioactive cloud drifted northwest toward Scandinavia. Swedish nuclear workers detected the contamination first. When they traced its origin to the Soviet Union, they demanded answers. Only then, 2 days after the explosion, did the Kremlin admit something had gone wrong. The evacuation of Pripyat began 36 hours after the blast. Residents were told to take documents and enough clothing for 3 days. They left pets, photographs, and everything they owned. They would never return. The city became a ghost town overnight, frozen in time, abandoned plates still sitting on kitchen tables decades later. What followed was a mobilization unlike anything since World War II. 600,000 soldiers, miners, and workers, later called liquidators, descended on Chernobyl. They built a concrete sarcophagus around the ruined reactor, while helicopters dumped sand and boron onto the burning core. Many worked in lethal radiation fields for only 90 seconds at a time before being pulled out, their bodies absorbing doses that would haunt them for years. The disaster exposed the rot at the heart of the Soviet system. A culture of secrecy, fear, and ideological rigidity had created the conditions for catastrophe. Party loyalty had been prioritized over technical expertise. Information that could have prevented the explosion was classified to protect the state's image. When the truth finally emerged, Soviet citizens realized their government had lied to them, had endangered their lives to preserve an illusion of perfection. Mikhail Gorbachev later called Chernobyl the real cause of the Soviet collapse, more than any policy or political movement. The explosion shattered the myth of Soviet technological supremacy. It demonstrated that a system built on suppressing truth could not survive its own contradictions. 5 years after the disaster, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Today, the exclusion zone remains uninhabitable. Radiation will persist for 20,000 years. The new safe confinement structure covers the original sarcophagus, a steel monument to human error and institutional failure. Chernobyl stands as a warning that when governments value ideology over honesty, when systems punish those who speak truth, the consequences can be measured in centuries. This channel exists to examine the machines and moments that shaped our world. If understanding how history's greatest disasters unfolded matters to you, consider subscribing. There are more stories waiting to be told.